2 years ago, I wrote this newsletter on risk management, which was really just a very broad term, and I kind of wanted to go into the details on this chart that I made. I went into it a little bit in the actual article itself in the newsletter, and I've used it in numerous risk presentations for businesses and for condo associations, HOAs, anybody who could have any sort of risk exposure on the commercial side. But I wanted to go into more detail and just kind of break it down layer by layer here. So let me pull that up. And it really hasn't changed in the past 2 years that I've put this together. And my view on it has changed a little bit. It's kind of like an iceberg, and the top of it is the tip of the iceberg, and as you go down, it's more of the underlayings, the things that aren't seen necessarily unless that's your specific focus and sort of job duty, like someone that works in insurance or a risk manager for a company or a committee, risk management or insurance committee for an association. But at the top is the proposal or coverage comparison. For a lot of business owners, this is the only thing that they ever really see or look at, and it has the least amount of value. It is the very tip of the iceberg that doesn't really tell you much about what could go wrong, what's covered, what's excluded. It's a simplified document for discussion purposes only, and it's kind of the summary of quotes, and that's why a lot of agents can get by being transactional. So they're really focused on the sale because there's nothing on the sophistication side to know what's covered, what the terms mean. It's really just the price. Let's compare all the prices. And that's what goes into this proposal or coverage comparison. And so I put in here summary of quotes designed by an agency to streamline discussion. It's not a legally binding contract. You'll see in every one of these, almost on every single page, there's going to be a disclosure saying this is not insurance, this is for review purposes only or for comparison purposes only. And so that's what's really scary. And if there's only one thing to really get out of this discussion, it's that a proposal or a coverage comparison or a quote comparison of multiple carriers that just shows a price and maybe a limit or a deductible is not sufficient to make decisions on for your insurance program, only because it doesn't really go into all the details that are actually covered or not covered. That goes in the contract itself, which is the insurance policy, which is the next layer down. So this is really what's kind of just below the surface if we're going to stick with the iceberg here. It is a legally binding risk transfer contract, and that's important. And so that's all the fine print that goes into saying this is what's covered, this is what's excluded, and it's the insurance carrier's obligations, but it's also the insurance buyer's obligations. And these are the small things that are negotiated by the agent, not usually by the buyer, but are represented to the buyer by the agent. So that's where all the discussion and comparison side of this is who the agent's going to talk to, these are the terms they're going to negotiate on. And if you have multiple agents bidding, you're almost always going to have different terms, and there's not really going to be apples to apples. You know, you hear this idea, apples to apples. Well, there's no such thing as apples to apples because there are so many terms, so many, an infinite number of differences that somewhere along the way something's going to be different. So yeah, we have to prioritize in the negotiation process what's most important to what's least important, because there's going to be some differences somewhere along the way. So I put in here legally binding risk transfer contract that you don't usually get until 30 days after binding. So they better be right, because once you sign that contract, once you pay that first check, you're not going to actually get the contract, if you're going to read it at all, until 30, 45, sometimes 60 days later. And that's what's going to include the policy language, the explicit or implicit coverages, exclusions, and conditions. And even if you did read and review these insurance policies, you really also have to look at the fact that the way insurance policies are written is very different than the way people read or interpret. Even from a legal standpoint, it can be very different. The thing that I always point out is the coverage is actually found in exceptions to the exclusion. So you'll see back here I have some review books. So I do policy reviews, and what you see in the policies themselves is the coverage is in yellow and the exclusions are in red. So you see entire documents of red, 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 and where you see the yellow is where it says this exclusion does not apply to. So it starts with an exclusion, then it goes into the exception to the exclusion, and bam, that's where your coverages are, which can be very confusing and is important when you're talking and going through that with your agent, your trusted partner who's negotiating on your behalf. And is one of the number one reasons you really need to choose your agent before you choose your actual carrier and program, because you need somebody who can help break it down, illustrate some of the differences, and decide what's important, what's not important, and what risks do you want to put on the carrier and which ones do you want to self-insure for, because you're self-insuring for a lot of things even though you may pay a lot of premium in your insurance contract. Now we're going to go even deeper down under the surface, what a lot of business owners and board members may not see as part of their risk management program, but are just as much of a factor and are that below the water of the iceberg. And that's the vendor or subcontractor contractual risk transfer. Every time you have a contractor come on site, work for you, you subcontract anything out, your business, your organization, your association is taking on risk. And you can, or I should say, you're transferring risk. You're either transferring it to you or you're transferring it to them. And you always have that option. You always have the ability to negotiate that. And you can talk to your attorney extensively about that, and I suggest that you do. But if you provide it to me, I do that for free. You don't pay me an hourly rate. I help you negotiate your insurance, and then I service your needs for the rest of the year. And this is part of what we can do for you. Discuss, is someone requiring primary non-contributory for you to work for them? What does that mean to you and your business? Or can you require primary non-contributory to possibly somebody doing work for you? And what could that mean for you in the long run? Insurance requirements, that's huge. If anybody comes on site, having at least basic insurance requirements that you define as opposed to what the person working for you or the person that you may be paying for their work is defining, very important. And then hold harmless agreements, which is very common language, kind of diving into what the differences could be there. As we go even further, risk consulting. So more services that we can provide on our team, going through the insurance portions of your contracts, maybe not even necessarily the insurance portion. Now, I'm not an attorney, I'm not giving legal advice, but there are little differences that can make, that could add up to make a big difference for you over the long run. And that's really what this focus is on, is not what is our 30-day timeline to the next insurance transaction and renewal. It's what is the 10-year difference of an insurance partner to a business, to an association, to an organization, and how can Brown and Brown, how can the team impact what you pay in the long run, not just for your insurance, but for claims, the deductible, the uncovered portions, the self-insured parts of having an insurance program or a risk management or risk transfer program. Proactive communications, providing options, updates, endorsements, changes to the policy year-round as your exposures change or as the environment changes or as you acquire more property or the property changes in value. That's all part of the process. And then next is loss control, which really fits into risk consulting as well. But this is where our partners, which are carriers and other service providers, can come in and help specific advice, but also just saying, what are you doing to mitigate claims and the stuff that we come on site to do and provide our eyes and ears on to say, hey, we see these claims all the time. Maybe you're focused on running a business, being profitable or being sustainable. These things may not pop up to you. That's not, the first part of kind of the operations in your mindset, but it is in ours and in our business partners. And the loss control makes a really big difference over the longer term for risk management and ultimately reducing the cost of risk. And that's our goal. That's our goal for all of our partners. We want to reduce the cost of risk for our clients by providing options up front, by building an insurance policy and program that's comprehensive but also competitive, provide advice year-round with the vendor contracts you have, the subcontractor contractual risk, through risk consulting, and then ultimately the day-to-day loss control. Oh, you have these stairs, they're not very well lit. Oh, you have a parking lot. What are some of the things that we see that may not be apparent to a business owner or a regular person who's able-bodied and would avoid these type of pitfalls or dangers? So, and part of that loss control is through some of the newsletters and other information I provide, information like this, that all builds the whole program. So it's really a year-round process where we want to be your partner. So love to talk to you. You can call me directly on my cell phone, 321-775-5514. Please share this with anyone else who you think could use this level of help and service. Once again, 321-775-5514. Have a great day.